I can imagine Tom doing something like that. In 1952, the family moved to Sepulveda. Okay, thank you. They moved to Sepulveda after his father got a job at Aerojet. Tom worked as a paperboy and loved Velveeta sandwiches on white Wonder Bread. And I thought about this for a minute, knowing Tom and he came a long way from those days. Who knew? He took care of his sister a lot, who had cerebral palsy, so that required a lot of care. He started getting interested in girls, and wanted to play hopscotch with them as much as possible. I was thinking about that. There must be something to that. In 1955, Aerojet opened a branch in Rancho Cordova, Fair Oaks, near Sacramento, which is where the family moved. And this is where Tom started high school and began to love music. Little Richard, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Fats Domino. He also really started liking girls. I see a theme here. He had several jobs, paid about $1 an hour, hop fields, dishwasher at a local restaurant. This is where his lifelong love of cars began. And he worked on cars in his free time. At the age of 14, I can't believe this, he got a Ford Model A. At 16, a 1941 Chevy. And at 17, a 1955 Chevy. He was senior class president and won best all around for the 1959 yearbook. He was doing it back in those days. After graduation, he started a summer job at Aerojet. So at this point, I'd like to introduce and welcome Bill Webster, the youngest of the Webster brothers, up to talk about growing up with Tom as his big brother and other childhood memories. And I'll mention that we're going to be playing a couple of songs periodically through the service, just that were selected as these are favorites of Tom. So those will be interjected here from time to time. Okay, Bill.
Okay, thanks.
Sir.
Wait a second, I gotta have some glasses on here.
This here just so you have an idea. It's not gonna ring. Just tells you 5 minutes. Just tells you that.
Oh, 5 minutes. Oh,
But no, but it's okay.
good luck on that.
It's okay.
Okay. So basically, our family moved to Sacramento in late '54. My parents were able to buy their first house. I don't know if it was their first one. It was a brand new house, a brand new neighborhood, brand new development, and it was only the house there was the first one, so it was wide open. It was in amongst all these pear orchards, almond trees, walnuts, all that stuff, and it was just wide open. Those guys had just all the dirt they wanted to play in, and then. The house was, not much drama. Our parents just kind of gave you enough room to keep you in line, and then you're up to you to make it out of, grow up to be your own person. Most days we had a sit-down dinner, the whole family, all 7 of us. And, most families did that. So it was about 5 o'clock, we'd have the sit-down dinner. So the older boys, Tom and Cal, would show up, and about 5 o'clock, and then we'd have this dinner, and then everybody have louder. You can? Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I better speak. Okay, we had this big sit-down dinner, and the whole family would sit there, and then at the end of the dinner, Tom, my dad, would discuss the world and its problems and try to solve it, and then. You could hear his laugh, and that was a unique laugh he had that you could really tell that. Okay, Tom was, like he said, in high school, he was popular, so along with Cal, and all these guys that come by the house, they had these hopped-up cars and stuff, and John and I, we were little, and so we'd go out and check the cars out, and they'd always include us and let us hang out there. And Tom and Cal, they were real outgoing guys. They could talk to anybody. John and I, real shy. I mean, really shy. And we couldn't do anything. So having them include us and let us meet their friends and stuff, that was really huge for us. And I think Tom really knew that. And so he was a big help. And, 30 years later, I'd see those guys and some of his friends, and they knew who I was. Hey, Bill, how's your brother Tom? And it was huge. Okay, So he talked about the 55 Chevy. And, that was Tom's first, the other cars were shared. Tom and Cal would share the cars. And then the 55 was Tom's first car of his own. So he got that. It was almost a brand new car. He was only 4 years old. So he decided he needs to hop it up. And Tom really didn't seem like a real car guy in his older years, but he was actually worked on cars quite a bit. So he decides he needs to hop this up. So he brings it in, pulls the engine out right down the bare block, get it all cleaned up, got himself a Corvette cam, solid lifters. Nothing sounds like solid lifters. And, and then now it's time, he let me help him all this time, just kind of him and I on there. And so we'd go to these auto supplies and he'd bring me along. So then now it's time to paint the engine up. And he's got to drive downtown and get the special paint. I don't know if he's like that, but he had to have the special paint, Champion Blue. Down, 12 miles down, 12 miles back. And so we painted it all up, got it back in the car, it's all running. It's got a 3-speed on the floor, some hubcaps, really cool car. And now it's time for a test drive. He goes, okay, John, Bill, let's go. And so he took us along. And he took us quite often, even with their friends, he'd take us. It was, like I said, really helpful to us young guys. So after that whole project was over, he took me over to his friend's house, and I was 8 at the time. Tom was probably around 18. And took me over to his friend's house, and he bought me a little lawnmower engine so that I could work on it. So it's my own deal, and I could work on this lawnmower engine. And that was huge because I ended up being a mechanical career, and that was really the start of it. And he knew what he was doing. He's a really kind person. Okay, then so he had the 55 for a couple years there. We went camping. My dad drove it. Cal drove it, and he just loved that car. He drove it to junior college, and for a couple years, and then it was time to go to Berkeley, I think, so he had to sell the car. Maybe it was too big a car for down here, I don't know. But he had to sell the car, and he later replaced it with a better car, but that's a different story, so I'll tell that someday. But and then once he came to Berkeley, that was home. He wasn't coming back to Sacramento. That was it, So he left at 20, let's say, and he'd come back to visit, but he wasn't moving back there. This is his place, and he loved it here, and loved all the people also, and that's kind of how he was. And I'll say, so now, it's fast forward a little bit, I'm like 14, and we lost our father when Tom was 20. So, I was kind of, my mom had to start working. She never worked before, and so we were kind of like, on our own a little bit. So I'm 14. And we went down the road a little bit, and then they're building a sophomore float for the homecoming parade. And so one of our friends could drive, so we thought, they need a moon. We need to moon this place. So but not just a moon, a double moon. We had a double moon place. So now we drive by with both our stuff hanging out, beep, 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 and we didn't know it, but there's a sheriff sitting there. So he chased us down and arrested us. Took us out to the juvenile detention center. And our parents had to come pick us up at 9:30 at night, like on a Tuesday. They weren't happy. And so anyway, so the officer out there says, look, come back Saturday night, 7 o'clock with a 500-word essay on acceptable teenage behavior. And so I go home and write my little essay, yes, please, all the good stuff, the stuff you're supposed to do, So then my mom can't make the meeting. She's got to do something with her job. So she calls Tom up and says, could you come up and do this? So Tom drives up Saturday afternoon, and he says, okay, what'd you do? I told him straight, he goes, oh, geez, doesn't sound like that. That's nothing. Well, so let me see this essay. I said, what? I got it covered. He goes, no, let me see it. So I give it to him. He starts reading it. He goes, no. And this is 1967 probably The Summer of Love and stuff like that. And he goes, this is not what you think. He wants to know what you think. I go, no, this dude wants to know what I wrote. He goes, no, he wants to know your opinion on what your opinion on life is and all that stuff. And I go, no, I'm not. He goes, I want you to rewrite it. I go, it took 2 weeks to write this. I'm not rewriting this thing. No way. So anyway, I won. And he goes, okay, we'll take it out there and see what happens. So we drive out there. We get in front of the guy's desk, and he says, I'm Tom, going to take his mother's place. And so the guy says, okay, hey, let's see your essay, Bill. So the guy starts reading the essay. Okay, it's all right. It's all right.
Bill, make sure you speak into the mic.
Okay. So anyway, Tom starts reading the essay. Oh no, the guy asked me at the thing, he says, let me see the essay. And I'm waiting for the bomb to drop on this one. And so the guy starts reading it, and he goes, oh my God, Bill, this is great stuff. This is exactly what I wanted you to do. God, you could just go. You know, your case closed. You're done. So I want to get out of there, so I'm walking out. And Tom's look over, steam's coming out of his ears. And so he says, could I talk to you for a minute? And he says, yeah, okay. So I go out, they close the door. So they're in there for 5 minutes. I can hear them, and they're kind of, a little bit louder than normal. And then Tom comes out, and he closes the door behind me, and he goes, you're right. That's exactly what the blankety blank wanted to hear. So let's just go. And the blankety blank was probably his favorite curse word. You might have heard it. Starts with an F. Anyway, so off we go. So.
It's a message from Tom. Is it okay?
Okay, good on that? Okay, so some 35 years later, Tom comes to my 50th surprise birthday party. And so the party goes real good, and then we're having food and all that stuff. And then at some point, Tom wants to make a speech. I don't think you might know him. He likes to make speeches. So he says, I'm really happy that you made your, living doing what you like, your mechanical field and all that stuff. And he says, Bill, you've got great emotional intelligence. I never heard that word before, so I didn't know exactly what it meant. I think I do now, but anyway, that was very nice for him to do that. So we'll go back to the officer at the court, and Tom, he'd give you your point of view, his point of view. He'd listen to your point of view. And geez, I'm losing this thing. Hang on a second. And he didn't always win. But the most beautiful thing about Tom is he didn't always have to win either. So I'm going to wrap this up a little bit here. So, our whole family knew that Tom was special right from the get-go. There was just something about him. You didn't know what it was, and we never even talked about it, but we all knew, everybody, mother and everybody. And he was just special, and you couldn't put your finger on it, but it ends up, it was everything about Tom that was special. That was Bill, the best thing. So that was our brother Tom, your husband, your father, uncle, brother-in-law, and a friend of many, many more. So thank you.
Riding along way out on the Kokomo. The night was young and the moon was cold, so we both decided to take a stroll. Can you imagine the way I felt? I couldn't unfasten a safety belt. Riding along my collar blue.
All right, rock and roll. Tom had good taste in music. I have to agree with that one for sure. Okay, so after high school, Tom attended American River Junior College from 1959 to 1962, and he met Ben Clausen, who ended up being his best friend and roommate in college. And as we heard, his dad passed away early in 1961 at the age of 47 from an aneurysm. About this time, he was introduced to Bob Dylan, which ended up being one of his favorite artists. And he transferred to UC Berkeley with Ben in 1962. Both were studying mechanical engineering, a subject dear to many of us here. And I'd like to invite Don Cropper up now. Don was a friend of Tom's from college, and he's going to read a letter written by another good friend, Ron Hoffman, another one of Tom's good college friends, and also I think Don's got his own comments that he'll be sharing with you. This will be kind of in the time period 1964 to 1970, so Don, please come up.
Thank you.
Make sure you speak into it.
Right.
Thank you.
So, Ron, I hope you can hear me and see me as well, because I'll be reading your message. But I'm going to add a few comments of my own because my introduction to Tom came a few years earlier than your message. Your message starts around 64. I met Tom in the dorms. I was one of a nucleus of mostly men who met most of us in the fall of 1959 at Smythe Hall, which was then at the top of Dwight Way in Berkeley, if you're familiar with the neighborhood. I don't believe it's there anymore. I think it's been demolished by now. But in any case, I was on a work-study program at that time, so I was going back and forth between Berkeley and San Diego. I had work periods in San Diego, then I'd come back to Berkeley for 6 months of school. And I was in school in the spring semester. So in the spring of 1962, I came back from San Diego, came back to Smythe Hall to the group of roommates that were all connected there. And that's when I first met Tom and Ben. They lived in a different building than my group did. They were in what was then called Cunningham Hall, which is now one of the new dorms over here. But Cunningham in the old days was part of Smythe Fernwald. Not that it really matters. In any case, they were a couple of buildings away, so I didn't see Tom and Ben quite as frequently as I saw the nucleus in the hall known as Freeborn. But one of the memories that I have, a very vivid memory I have of Tom, is his sense of humor and, of course, his laugh. I mean, that laugh you could hear probably a mile away. It was just a booming, resonant, happy sound that would make you smile whether you felt like smiling or not. I'll tell one anecdote of my own about Tom. I'm pretty sure this was Tom, but things get fuzzy after 60 or 70 years. I was a year younger than most of the people in my class. I had skipped part of a grade earlier on, so I wasn't 21, but most of my friends were. And they had a habit of going down to Laval's Cantina over here on Northside, if you're familiar with Berkeley. And I don't know if it was happy hour or what the occasion was, but they would get absolutely snockered. It was just amazing to me. And I was very jealous because I couldn't. I wasn't 21. And the memory that I'm seeing in my mind is, I'm pretty sure this was Tom. He had this Army helmet that he called his drinking helmet. And what it really was a helmet liner. It wasn't the steel helmet, it was the plastic helmet liner that went inside. And he'd stick a candle on top of it, so it had wax burned down on the helmet. And for some reason, I really coveted that. I really thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. Whether it was or not, who knows? But anyway, they seemed to have a really great time. They enjoyed themselves. I was jealous. But that's my little anecdote of Tom from our college days. I think I'll start reading Ron Hoffman's message now, because he's going to cover the period of time starting around 1964 and up through 1970. So Ron, I hope I do justice to your recollections. He says, the memories of Tom that I present cover the period 1964 to 1970. I hope these few recollections will be meaningful for Tom's family as they involve a period before he met and married Chris. Tom and I became friends during the summer of '64. In June, we had graduated from Berkeley, each with a BSME, and taken full-time jobs in the aerospace industry with Rocketdyne in Canoga Park, Southern California, San Fernando Valley, if I remember correctly. Tom worked in a turbo machinery group in Canoga Park, the main plant, while I, who had worked at Rocketdyne the previous summer of '63, was 15 minutes away at the Santa Susana test facility in the hills of Chatsworth. Now, I'm a little familiar with the aerospace industry, and that test facility was where they tested the rocket engines that they were designing and building. So every once in a while, one would blow up. I mean, I remember seeing things on the newscasts, because I was following the space program pretty closely. I was also an engineer. And that was quite a place to be working, I'm sure. Spectacular. Anyway, another 1964 mechanical engineering UC graduate was Dick Golden, who also worked for Rocketdyne. Dick's over there towards the back, about halfway on the left. But only for the summer, as he was headed to graduate school at USC in the fall. Dick and I knew each other at Berkeley, having spent our senior year together as lab partners. Dick and Tom soon met and opted to share an apartment in Canoga Park. By the end of the summer, when Dick left, Tom was looking for a roommate to take Dick's place. That's when Dick introduced me to Tom. Soon thereafter, Tom and I, and another recent hire, Rich Kale, I think that's how you pronounce it, decided to get an apartment in Westwood near UCLA. We chose Westwood, even though it was 30 minutes away by freeway from Canoga Park, because I was taking a night class at UCLA, and Tom was interested in social opportunities around the campus. That's a theme you will hear again and again. In those days, Tom dressed the image of a 1950s all-American young man, even though we're now in the 60s. He wore a sport coat and tie to work. His hair was a crew cut, and he drove a brand new 1964 Corvette Stingray hardtop. Another theme we've heard before. That car was his prized possession. Most days he drove Rich and me to and from work by taking the long way via the Pacific Coast Highway and Topanga Canyon Road, so he could enjoy the thrill of driving the twisty roads. During the fall of '64, Tom would leave work on Fridays. I didn't know this, by the way. Leave work on Fridays and drive to Berkeley to attend weekend parties and an occasional Cal football game. There he would hook up with former Berkeley roommates Don Cropper, that's me, Ben Clausen, John Nidecker, and the rest of his college dorm buddies and their girlfriends. Then Sunday evening he would drive back to Westwood. These trips resulted in a few speeding tickets, but Tom didn't care. He was making good money and enjoying his freedom. In the spring of '65, I joined him on one of his trips to the Bay Area, where we were introduced to Bence Gerber at the Heidelberg on Telegraph. This is an aside. Well, it's too long so skip the aside. Bence was living in a studio apartment, excuse me while I turn the page here, try to, in Berkeley, somehow connected to Ben. Well, it was in the apartment on Colby Street in South Berkeley, North Oakland. And there was a little studio in the back. It was like a shack, I would say, more than a studio. But that's where Bence lived, and that's where I met Bence during that same time. And anyway, we spent the afternoon drinking beer and began a friendship that has lasted over half a century. So that's Ron meeting Tom. During the spring of '65, Tom, Rich, and I would go out on Thursday nights to share a pitcher of beer, another common theme, at places like McGee's on Westward Boulevard or the Orr House in Santa Monica. Tom would always drive as he seemed most capable when we were all a bit buzzed. We would also try to attend performances by local singing groups. For example, one night we went to Randy Sparks' club to hear a group called the Back Porch Majority, which was the group that fed talent to the New Christie Minstrels. The warm-up singer was an unknown singer named John Denver. In May, we moved to an apartment on the beach in Santa Monica. However, a month later, I left Rocketdyne for a job in the Bay Area. Tom stayed at Rocketdyne a couple more years before moving back to the Bay Area to take a job with Shell Development in Emeryville. He eventually shared a house in Berkeley on 4th Street with Ben, which eventually led them to undertake the building of the 38-foot trimaran. Tom and I renewed our friendship and began our Thursday night beer drinking outings at the likes of the Albatross, affectionately known as the Bird, and the Steppenwolf, where we both met girls and danced away many a night. Bence, as well as other engineers, physicists, mathematicians that we worked with from Berkeley and Physics International, where Bence and I were both employed, were part of the late 60s Berkeley scene. For me, it temporarily ended in August of '68 when I left for graduate school in Madison, Wisconsin. I came back the summer of '69 to the Bay Area for a break from the Midwest and moved into the 4th Street house with Tom. Ben had moved out, and I moved in with Ben around that same time. During that 3-month period, Tom and I renewed our Thursday night social activities, and around the 4th of July, we hosted a party in our backyard attended by close to 50 people. We bought and roasted a 75-pound pig in a luau-style rock pit and bought crates of pineapples and melons from the farmer's market. It was quite an affair. In August, I left again to return to Madison. January 1970, I returned from Wisconsin to rejoin PI. That was Physics International. Tom and I resumed our friendship. He was still working for Shell Development, so it was back to the Bird, that was the Albatross, on Thursday nights. In March, we rented a house in the Oakland Hills. Turn the page. From the Muffy Man, M-U-F-F-Y, the Muffy Man. The Muffy Man was a regular at the Bird. He sold a form of pierogi at the bar, which he called a muffy. We hosted a couple memorable parties that spring and summer. We also began attending an encounter group in El Cerrito. It was there that was Ron, met the love of my life, Carol, who I met one evening in early June when she accompanied her sister Chris, who was dating Tom. Since 1970, Tom and I remained nerd friends and became brothers-in-law, having married sisters, Chris and Carol. Over the years, we shared our interests in energy technologies and I can't pronounce this word, societal challenges. We worked together at Energy Line and UC Berkeley. Even after retirement, we engaged in weekly walks during which we discussed the challenges of climate change. In fact, our last walk took place a week before Tom's stroke. There are more stories of our 1965 to 1970 adventures I could tell, such as the time Tom, Dick, Rich, and a few other Rocketdyne engineers and I went to Tijuana. But we'll end with the following recounting of a hitchhiking trip to Seattle we took the last week of May 1970. So, here's the hitchhiking trip. Tom, Suzanne, can't remember her last name, and I, so I guess there's 3 of them, started our hitchhiking trek in a parking area near the bridge as you enter Point Reyes Station on California Highway 1. Tom and I planned to hitchhike to Seattle to go sailing with Dick Golden, his wife Linda, and their 3 kids. Suzanne was only going as far as Eugene, Oregon. We planned to sleep on the beach in Mendocino the first night, then catch a ride to Eugene on 101. It didn't work exactly as planned. first, it was difficult to get rides. Although we were upstanding citizens, mind you, and they were all, had good jobs, he says, but we had long hair and bushy beards, and people would pass us by yelling we should get jobs. Second, some of the people who picked us up were a bit scary themselves, and we had concerns for our own safety. One such ride was from 3 teenagers who'd been drinking, and once we were in their car, decided not to go in the direction we wanted to go. When we asked to be let out, they resisted, but finally let us go. 2 days later, another ride from Eugene to Portland on I-5 was from a sheep shearer who had a loaded .344 Magnum sitting next to him on the seat. Eventually, though, we made it to the Goldens. The next day, we sailed off, planning to spend the night camping on an island with a great beach that Dick had chosen. Unfortunately, Dick had misread the tide charts, and about 10 p.m. we realized we'd have to return to the boat because the beach was going to be underwater. Last page. The next hour was spent ferrying everyone and all of our stuff back to the boat in a small inflatable dinghy. Linda was taking care of setting us up on the boat, Dick was re-anchoring the boat, and Tom and I made a couple commando-type trips from shore to the boat on a very dark, moonless night. It was exciting to say the least, so I'm glad Tom was there to help. The next morning, we awoke on the sailboat to a large thump. We had run aground. The tide was now going out, and our anchor held us too close to shore. Tom, Dick, and I grabbed a very long rope, tied to the top of the mast, and rowed to shore. This is ingenious when you think about it. Rowed to shore, where we used the leverage of the length of the mast to tilt the boat's keel out of the rocks. Can you imagine that?
Yeah.
Pretty remarkable. Well, they're engineers, right? Okay. Anyway, so they tilted the boat's keel, got it off the rocks. Linda used the engine to back the boat into deeper water. Again, Tom and I felt like commandos on a mission. Subsequently, we headed back to the Goldens' home, where we collapsed into a deep sleep. The next day, Tom and I caught the Coast Starlight back to Oakland, that's the train, where we arrived 23 hours later. So it doesn't make any better time nowadays either. And this is again Ron speaking. I'm a better person having known Tom, and I would certainly agree with that. I will certainly never forget him, and I will certainly agree with that. We shared many wonderful times together these past 57 plus years. Thanks, Ron. Yeah.
Just imagine cruising down Highway 1.
Always, he said, flaring.
Softly smile, I know she must be proud. She goes with to across the moon. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me excitations. I'm picking up good vibrations by my
Yeah, we could Listen to that one for a while. That's a great one. Okay, well, we're going to move on, and I'd like to invite Dick Gordon to the podium. Dick Golden, sorry, I'm so sorry, to the podium. He is a friend of Tom's from when they lived in LA after graduating college, and he's going to speak about this saga of building the boat and meeting Chris and their sailing adventures together. I believe Chris wrote this.
Some of it.
Yeah, or some of it. Anyway, so
Some of it.
so Dick, please speak into the mic there. Thanks, man.
Thank you. So the adventures that we were on, they were already described in that letter that Ron wrote, some of the adventures anyway. I roomed with Tom in California just after I graduated college, and we roomed together in Canoga Park. We had a great time, and I never understood why he was so into cars, but he had that Corvette Stingray, and he really loved that car, and I remember he washed it almost every day. It was nuts. But that was his bag. And then I went back to school, and we separated for a while. Like this, Mobetta?
I think this way, the
Huh?
other way.
The other way?
That way.
Oh,
Yeah.
talk to it like
There you
this.
go.
Yes, Mobetta. But the event that Ron described and the boat, I take full credit for going aground and being flooded on the cliff. I had a friend recently tell me, he said, Dick, you had 3 engineers on that boat, and you guys couldn't even read a tide table? So, well, it was my fault. But I was pretty new to sailing, and one thing I wanted to mention is that when I came back from Bolivia, I was in the Peace Corps, and I came back from Bolivia in 1968, and I met a woman on the way back, and I only knew her for 3 days and asked her to marry me. It was pretty nuts. So I got home, and I heard that she had come back from Guatemala, which is where I met her, and I decided to drive down and see her. She was in Bakersfield. So I got in my car, drove, and I needed to stop and take a rest for a minute. So I stopped at Tom's place. I don't know if he was with Ron, they were rooming together or not, but anyhow, I mentioned what I was doing, and he thought I was absolutely raving mad. He said, you cannot do this, Dick. You've got to think about this. Don't do something so stupid as marrying a girl after you've only known her for 3 days. And I said, okay, Tom, so what? And I rested there, and then I went and married Linda. And, and when Tom and Ron came up, hitchhiking to Washington State and sailing with us over to Restoration Point, it was called, and we camped there for the night and had those adventures of going aground and tipping the mast over to get the boat off, and Linda handling the boat beautifully the whole time, and the rest of us. Think about it. This is the middle of the night. 3 guys in their underpants and t-shirts, and we're rowing the boat towards shore so we can pull the mast over. We had to jump in the water, freezing cold. Puget Sound water is like 50 degrees when it's warm. And so it was just a crazy, crazy little voyage. And I think they realized Linda was all right because she didn't divorce me right on the spot and say, I'm going back to my parents. Anything's got to be better than this. But later on, we decided, Linda and I, to go sailing in a bigger boat. So we managed to get one. And in 1972, Tom helped me sail a 47-foot ketch up the coast from Southern California, LA area, up to Puget Sound. And our other crewman was Tony Crispino. Unfortunately, Tony isn't here today, but and my 2 boys. I had Scott and Rick with me. So it was 5 guys, and we decided to sail up the coast in this old wooden boat. Now, it was in Marina del Rey, California, and the minute we left, we hit this huge northerly, northwesterly trying to go around Point Conception, which is a major point there. And we got blown back and had to anchor behind one of the Gulf Islands. I believe it was Santa Barbara Island. So we broke a shroud during that little melee. A shroud is one of the pieces of wire that holds up the mast, so we could have lost the mast right there. And we managed to anchor off this place, and the boat filled with water for some unknown reason. And it was horrible, but we managed to survive it and get the boat jury-rigged so we could sail north. And we decided we were going straight up to Puget Sound. We weren't going to stop at anywhere after that one little stop behind Santa Barbara Island. But we reached a point north of here called Punta Gorda. And Punta Gorda is just a big round thing on the coast. It's not a real point. And the wind blew like crazy from the northwest, and we had to come into a place called Noyo Anchorage, get out of the weather. So we came into Noyo, almost went on the beach trying to come in because it was middle of the night, and all of a sudden we could see white ahead of us, and we knew there were waves on the shore. We had missed the opening to the bay. So by the grace of God, we got in and settled in at Noyo Anchorage. After provisioning a bit and picking up some fuel and resting, we took out again, headed north, and got a huge southerly that blew us all the way up to Puget Sound. It was a great trip. It was really, it was my first time I'd ever been to sea, Tony's first time he'd been to sea, my kids, their first time, and Tom had been out there before. But the Big Blue is certainly a different place. It's not for everybody, I'll tell you that. It was a great trip, and we enjoyed it thoroughly. Now, when you fast forward from that, all of a sudden, the years seemed to scream by. I mean, Tom and Chris would come up, and we'd fool around together up in the San Juan Islands, or we'd come down and we'd see them. And I recall that Tom and I, when we were older, already we're old men, you know, and we'd take these walks together, and we'd talk about sailing, our adventures sailing, we'd talk about the environment, we talk about physics, we talk about engineering, we talk the sciences, and we talk spirit. Tom was on a course intersecting with God. And I mean, he didn't call it God, we call it spirit. It's easy one to, you can do it any way you want. He was more on a Buddhist path. And I myself had chosen a path of Raja Yoga, which is a meditation path. As well as Tom had chosen a path of meditation along the Buddhist lines. And so here we were, we'd come from these kids working at Rocketdyne, making rockets that launch into space, through sailing adventures that we'd shared. It was quite amazing. And into the sciences, and out of the sciences, and into retirement. Although Tom wasn't quite as retired as me. He never really retired. And into spirit. And I thought, what a journey we had together. What a wonderful time. What a wonderful life we had together as friends, longtime friends. And it reminded me of something that I read of Ram Dass. Ram Dass was most of you have heard of him, of course. He was a good writer and a wise person. And one of his statements was, we're all just walking each other home. And that's what I felt like with Tom. We were walking each other home. In this case, in spirit. And it seems like he got to the gate before me. But I have to say, Tom, I'm not very far behind. I'm going to see you there. And when we get to the other side, we're going to go walking together. And we'll talk about spirit some more. And who knows, maybe we'll talk about the sciences. But for my money, he was a good friend. And I'll remember him always. God bless you, Tom. Take care.
All right. Thank you, Dick, for those great comments. Well, not only was Tom a tinker, an adventurer, and so many things, he had a long and successful career in engineering. And that's where I spent a lot of time with him. So I'm going to introduce myself now, Fred Bauman, and spend a little time talking about my time. And I hear Dick talk about all this stuff. I mean, Tom seemed like he had about 10 amazing friends that he did all this amazing stuff with. It's just incredible, the breadth of that guy's impact and engagement with those around him. Tom and I first met back in the late 1970s as members of the Passive Solar Group at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. I know we've got several folks that were in that same area working with us in Building 90. And since that time, Tom and I have become, he's become one of my best friends in my life, and I'm proud to say as a coworker, he's the person I've known the longest and worked the closest with in my career. So we covered a lot of ground together, did a lot of things, and we both left LBL in the early 1980s as a result of cuts to the solar energy program by our friend Ronald Reagan, as we remember. We went our separate ways for a while, but we kept in touch, and you've heard that Tom went off with Ron and started a startup energy line and did that HVAC controls and all this kind of stuff for a while. I went down to UC Berkeley and joined Ed Ahrens and Gail Bragger and others in the building science group down there. And in the mid-1990s, as funding was ramping up and we were actually getting ready to establish what became known as the Center for the Built Environment, which started in 1997. We were looking for some talented people to add to our team. And as most of you know, the best place to look when you need some good, reliable talent is to look at people you know. And so fortunately, Tom was available. I think Energy Line had finally run its course, as many startups do. And so I asked Tom to join our group, and the rest is history. And when Tom joined CBE, I was working on a technology called underfloor air distribution, and interest and growth in this technology was kind of exploding at the time. It was a very exciting time, and Tom joined, and we found ourselves running 5 to 10 different projects on underfloor air in all different aspects. It was quite a time at that point, and as things took off, people jokingly referred to CBE, which is the Center for the Built Environment, they referred to us as the Center for Underfloor Air Distribution at one point. And Tom and I, we basically worked together on virtually every project together, and we were known as the UFAD bros, I think, at that point. And I can say without a shadow of doubt, we would have never accomplished all the impressive accomplishments we did in that research without Tom's special experience, knowledge. He had very unique knowledge that was unique to our group, and just his dedication, his hard work is just amazing. He had a true love. He actually, I was going to say, he led our building energy simulation work. That's a skill that he developed up at LBL, and so he did that. But he also had a true love for experimental work. It's never just one thing with Tom. He's conquering the world. And I've told this before. I think I talked about it at his retirement party. One of Tom's favorite sayings is, "The devil's in the details." He's been known for that for so long, and after spending all these years working with Tom, I think for him it was really closer to the joy is in the details. This is just what he would do. He would dive into stuff and figure stuff out, like when he figured out how to build a boat, from scratch. Among his many accomplishments while working at CBE was he started a whole new effort focusing on wireless measurement technology applied to field studies. And he and our director, Ed Ahrens, built this portable measurement cart for underfloor air distribution that we took around and took measurements in all these buildings, and that was quite an accomplishment. And as with everything, he immersed himself in all the details to make sure that thing worked well. It was quite something. But in addition to all the great work and research he did, for me, working with Tom was a luxury. because not only was he a skilled and knowledgeable researcher, he was a remarkable person who reminded you that there is so much more to life than just work, as we've been hearing. His patience, wisdom, and compassionate personality allowed him to serve as a mentor for many of the students, young researchers, visiting scholars, all the folks that we worked with in the years at a university. You come in contact with, and kind of every year there's a new group coming through. And heck, he was a mentor to me. You know, he's that kind of a guy. He engaged meaningfully with so many of the amazing people that we came in contact with over the years. You know, he would have these, he'd just get into these discussions about all these topics that he was so interested in and so passionate about. He was, and we've already heard from Dick, and we'll be hearing more about it. You know, we know he was very dedicated and interested to the study of Buddhism and spirituality. And I'd like to tell this one story. You know, he was dedicated to meditation every day. So we'd go. We often were traveling to an ASHRAE conference. Many of you know what I'm talking about. In the East Coast, time zone changes, and he'd be up, you know, an hour before. You know, it's 7 a.m. and he's up, so it's 4 a.m. in the West Coast time, and he's up doing his meditation. He would get up every time, every day, and I'm going, you got to be kidding me. But he would do it. He never missed it. And he really loved to talk about and share his belief in the value of meditation in his life. And so, as a really demonstrating that, after he retired from CBE in 2012, about 10 years ago, he still was working part-time with us, and he started up a weekly meditation class for all interested staff at our group at CBE. So we would meet once a week with Tom. He'd come in and we'd do yoga and you know, we'd do walking and sitting meditation that he would guide us on, and then he would always have a reading from his massive library, and he's always reading a book about something. You know, here's a great book, you know, and he'd share them with us and all this stuff. So we'd read and we'd talk about how that applied to our lives. It was just a great way for him to show how meditation can be taken and made a part of your life. And it was so important. It had a big effect on me and many others. So I'll conclude here. Just to say, it was just such it's an honor for me to be here, a part of Tom's celebration today. And I'll miss my gray-haired, ponytailed friend for sure. One great thing about Tom, though, is he taught us so well. He was a teacher. He taught us so well that we will remember him well. All right, so now, moving right along, I am going to introduce our next speaker, Wolfgang Lukaszek. And Wolfgang joined CBE in 2003 as an engineering graduate student from Austria. He's a good example of one of the young folks that came through and Tom had an impact on. And he worked with us for 3 years as we were doing underfloor air distribution research. And I always like to tell this story about how we first met Wolfgang. You know, Tom and I were always in his office having some detailed, intense discussion about whatever project we were doing. You know, we were in, and there was a knock on the door, and you know, I think it was either Ed or somebody else came in with this young student saying, "Oh yeah, hi, this is Wolfgang. He's going to work with you on underfloor air." We had never, you know, as often happened in our group, we hadn't been told about Wolfgang coming at all. So we're kind of going, "Who the hell is this guy?" You know. He shows up and then Wolfgang, yeah, I'm going to work. Anyway, that was funny, but Wolfgang turned out to be a fantastic worker, and we had a fantastic time. And he's going to come up and talk a little bit about his experience with Tom. I do want to say that with Tom's interest in climate change and everything, he would be extremely proud of Wolfgang. I just want to say a few words about Wolfgang. His goal right now in his work is to contribute to the decarbonization of the real estate industry. And he's currently founder and CEO of Otera, a technical and environmental real estate advisory firm, and founder and CEO of the sustainability management platform called Blue Auditor. Both are based in Vienna, Austria, which is where Wolfgang traveled from to be here today. And I had the pleasure of going on a nice run with him up in the Berkeley Hills this morning. So Wolfgang.
All right, my notes. Usually I'm okay at talking without notes, but this is a special occasion, so I get a little bit emotional sometimes, so I gotta hang on to my notes. And thanks for the introduction, Fred. I'm really glad to be here today, and first of all, Chris, Kelsey, Nate, where are you? Outside. Brett and Lainey, from my entire family. I would like to express my sincere condolences and my deepest sympathy for your loss. Being here today with all of you is really a great honor for me, and at the same time, it's also really important for me to be here to celebrate Tom's life with you. By the way, I didn't know about many of those stories. It sounded like he had like 10 lives before I got to know him. Tom was about 60 when I met him, 62, and I was back in Austria. When you're 60, you are thinking about dying, basically. And there was Tom, working full blast on his research. So I was blown away, basically. The fact that there are so many of you here is just another testament to how many lives Tom has touched, and I'm eternally grateful that my life is one of them. To be honest with you, it's quite difficult for me to be standing here finding the right words, and there is this quote from a German poet. I find it very appealing. It says, "Where you feel the most, you know the least to say." Tom was not only, as we call it at home in Austria, my diploma father, basically the guy that coaches you through your diploma thesis. And by the way, guess what I was working on my diploma thesis? Of course, underflow heat distribution. He was someone I really enjoyed spending time with, both at work and also together with our families when we came to visit, or when you guys came to visit us back in Austria. Tom was also a mentor to me. I looked up to him. He was always very encouraging. And I remember that when we spoke and I shared some exciting news, his favorite words were, "Oh, Wolfgang, good for you." How I see it is that the way he interacted and engaged with his environment, with his community, with politics, with nature, with spirituality, with his friends, and most importantly with you, with his family, it is exceptional, truly exceptional. He also touched my life to quite a considerable extent through his professional advice and his friendship. In addition, speaking about meditation, he introduced me to meditation a couple of years ago, and I think you will see this picture that Chris took when we were doing this meditation session at your house. And I've been sticking with it now for a couple of years now on a daily basis. So, Tom, through this, you have manifested yourself also in my life. Giving me the opportunity to remember you and be grateful every day. I thank you for this. And I can hear you say, "Oh, Wolfgang, good for you." Thank you.
All right, thank you, Wolfgang. All right, well, as we all know with Tom, it always started with family. Tom cherished his relationship with Chris. He was so proud of his two kids, Brett and Kelsey. Who doesn't get a big smile on their face when they think about doing something with the always positive and fun-loving Websters? I mean, or hearing Tom telling another amazing story of Brett's mountaineering adventures or Kelsey's accomplishments as a nurse and mother. I mean, it's just that family was something that we all admired, and we're so it just was such an awesome thing to witness, and we're so lucky to see that. I'd like to invite Brett and Kelsey up to talk about their dad.
I'm gonna kind of read just cause. My dad meant and will always mean so much to me. Our relationship wasn't complicated. It was just good. And it's hard to put all the things that I feel about him, all the different things he was, into words. It feels like words aren't enough, and that they couldn't possibly be enough to convey how deeply I love him. So I will focus on one of the attributes about him that I appreciated most, which was his reliability. My dad was a busy man. He often took on more than most people can handle. He was always burning the candle at both ends, as he used to say. He was busy with work, deep dive reading into his various interests of psychology, wellness, and health, especially focused on how to live longer, spirituality, history, and researching everything about anything that anyone asked him that he didn't know the full and complete answer to. He chased the why in all aspects of his life. But despite having such a full plate, he was always 100% available to me as a dad. Literally any time I ever needed him, for something as simple as help with homework when I was a kid, researching and then compiling a list of pros and cons to any large purchase I ever made, to various life crises, he was there. He would drop everything, or more regularly just push it to the late hours of the night because he could function on very little sleep, to be there when he was needed. And he never once made me feel like it was an inconvenience to him or that it was adding stress to his already stressful load. I'm a parent now, and I can say with confidence that that's actually not an easy thing to do. It speaks to his generosity and kindness that he so graciously gave his time to the people he cared about. When I was in 6th grade, I was diagnosed with panic disorder. Later, major depressive disorder was added to the diagnosis. So anxiety and depression are two things I struggle with on and off in my life. When I was first diagnosed, my dad dove headfirst into researching and purchasing all the best informational and workbooks, leveraging his connections to find the best local pediatric therapists and psychiatrists for me, completing almost every page of the anxiety and phobia workbook with me, and recording his voice, reading the visualizations that helped me calm down when my anxiety was ramping up. My dad and I could connect easily during this time because he had also struggled with anxiety and depression. He got it in a different way than you can if you've never experienced mental health struggles. My dad had always been someone I felt close to and safe with. I am lucky in that I was born into a family with two exceptionally supportive and loving parents. But through his dedication to my mental well-being, both providing a loving space for me to experience my feelings and support to moving towards solutions, he became a main person of safety and grounding for me. Even through my teenage years, early adulthood, and early parenthood, whenever I was struggling or a medication I was on stopped working or I just needed somewhere physically or emotionally to safely just be, my childhood home and my parents were where I needed to be. Of course, as I got older, I developed tools to handle my anxiety and depression on my own, and I introduced more safe people into my life, like my husband, for example. But my dad still represented safety to me, so much so that when he died, I all of a sudden felt like I was just floating in space, ungrounded. like I didn't have the safety net that he created to hold me in my place anymore. It was not the way I expected to feel. I'm an adult now. I'm also very close to my mom, who is thankfully still around. I have 2 kids, and I'm hopefully starting to develop myself as one of the safe people for my own children. I think part of it was that I never needed to fully explain my feelings with my dad. He had been with me my entire life, obviously. He knew me and loved me so deeply, unconditionally, and empathetically through every phase, every difficult period, every scary experience. He never needed context. So I could just be in whatever state I showed up in. It really took the pressure off and created a space where relaxation and processing of challenging emotions could take place. I miss my dad. It actually physically hurts my heart how much I miss him. There will not be a day that goes by that I don't wish he was here. Not a celebration or a family dinner we have where I won't miss his presence, his impressive appetizer spreads, his characteristic facial expressions and laugh. Not a single joyful or even hard experience I have with my own kids where I won't think, oh, I wish my dad could see this. Now that I've had some space after his death, I'm starting to feel grounded again. I'm allowing more and more for others to help fill in this enormous gap that my dad's death has left. But of course, no one or combination of people will ever be able to completely fill that gap. I am just so grateful that I got to be his daughter. I'm so grateful he showed me what it means to be a deeply loving man, unafraid to experience and discuss emotion. He helped pave the way for me finding someone like that to share my life and raise my own children with. I know how lucky I am to have had a dad who I felt so close to, so connected to through my entire life. I just hope that when I die, my kids will grieve for me in the same way I'm grieving for my dad. Not that I want them to experience this level of pain or sorrow, but it will mean that I have been a source of compassion, unconditional love, deep connection, and grounding for them. That I had been one of the most important people to my kids, like my dad was and always will be to me.
It's so wonderful to hear what everybody has to say today, and I think my dad is looking down with smiles and probably some tears also. So if I'm being honest, I've been nervous about this moment for a long time, not because of the enormity of sadness, grief, and gratitude that I knew I would be and am currently experiencing, but because I've been acutely aware for as many years as I can remember that there'd be no way to do justice to the person my dad was, or what he meant to me, or how much I'll miss him in a short speech. When I was an undergrad at UC Santa Cruz, I studied philosophy, among other things. And in my classes, we were always hemming and hawing and trying to define what it meant to be good or live a good life. And I remember discovering this feeling that while I didn't think I could describe the characteristics or general parameters of goodness any better than anyone else, I felt like I knew it in a visceral and emotional way, and that my dad was at the center of a lot of those definitions for me. My entire life, he was like the brightest North Star, orienting, guiding, and pointing the way, but not in any kind of overbearing or even explicit manner, but just by being who he was. He provided all the best kind of consistent guidance. He was so engaged with the world around him and within him, embracing all of the richness, flavors, beauty, and curiosity, as well as the challenges and problems. I think it's safe to say my dad was in love with life and living. When I was in high school, he taught me the human being salute, where you stand in the midst of some beautiful place, hold your hand over your heart and raise the other in the air, and you let out a celebratory yell as loud and as long as you can to just appreciate what it is to be human and to experience all the beauty on the face of this planet. I went on to share this with countless students in the far-flung corners of the earth, most often from craggy or snowy mountaintops. As I think many folks have alluded to here, my dad comprehensively traversed the space between the empirical and scientific and the spiritual and philosophical. On the one hand, you could ask him a question with a scientific answer, and if he knew it, he'd explain it to you in about 6 different ways. And if he didn't know it, as Kelsey said, he would immediately dive into hours of research until he properly understood the answer and all of the surrounding issues, often staying up until the wee hours. Sleep is the brother of death, he would often say, and boy, he embraced that. And if it turned out that he was unsatisfied with the literature and explanations of others, he might even conduct his own experiments to better understand the problem. So intellectually curious. This was one of his core attributes. Even in the period after his first stroke, while lying in the ICU at Alta Bates, the nurses would come around every hour to take his vitals, and they would measure his pupil shape and size with a handheld digital tool. One time I was in the room next to him when this happened. He wasn't saying much, but then all of a sudden, as the nurse was holding his eye open, he excitedly says, "Brett, check out this machine they use to measure my pupils." A few weeks later, he got on a big kick about how much data the hospitals must be collecting. "Brett, I'd like to see if we can get LBL involved in understanding all of this data." And then on the other hand, he spent 40 plus years so committed and invested to his own spiritual and psychological growth. Always quick to embrace and try on new ideas, he was always on a quest for deeper levels of understanding, emotion, and experience. A lot of people would turn to my dad for advice or answers, and somewhat similar to his scientific side, he didn't always give answers in the way people were looking for him. But I also think this is where some of his wisdom lay. I remember really trying to pin him down one time to help me answer what the hell I should do with my life. This was back when I was starting to realize I wasn't going to be able to work in the mountains forever. And I remember searching for the right decision to make. And my dad said something like, "I don't know that it's a decision you really end up making. You just go down a road, and that road leads to another road, and you might make a U-turn or a hairpin, but it all ends up just piecing together like that." So that left me good and confused. And then I ended up going and doing something pretty similar to what he did, working on building energy issues. Jeez. My dad shared and continue, my dad and I shared and continue to share an amazing bond for which I am so grateful and will cherish for the rest of my life. Our many years of tinkering in the garage, building projects, and car maintenance culminated in many ways with the 2016 tiny house build summer out at the Richmond Field Station. It was such a joy to work side by side with my dad, bringing our relative and by that point distinct strengths to the project. And most importantly, this is where we both met my would-be wife, Lainey. I'm not actually sure who fell in love with Lainey first, my dad or I, or me. But the bond that formed between them, the two of them, is something that is so dear to me. My dad taught me so many lessons, again, mostly by example. And here's just a few that have been on my mind recently. To value practical know-how as much as intellectual knowledge. To always do a complete job. That patience pays dividends. And that strings of many swear words in a row at the right time can be incredibly relieving. To always be there for your family. From hundreds of ping pong games in the garage, meticulous prep of the field for every Little League game I played, a ride to the airport every single time any one of us needed it, to provide space and be a good listener, to show up when someone needs help, and to bring humor and love to every occasion. To really enjoy good food and drink especially wine and ice cream, preferably chocolate and vanilla. To love and bond with your children's partners and be a great grandparent, including to those grandkids yet to come. And to be a person of integrity. My dad was a great father, and it is one of the great honors of my life to be his son. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, you guys. That was fantastic. All right, well, we are going to have one more speaker here. I'd like to invite Amma up to speak about Tom and his spiritual journey. A few words about Amma, who lived downstairs in the studio unit at Chris and Tom's house in Piedmont for 2.5 years. And she became a dear friend of the Webster family, and Tom so enjoyed his many conversations with Amma, learning about her teachings and her experience of 26 years as a Buddhist nun. And you can imagine Tom was digging in to learn everything he could from her. She was a source of guidance and comfort for Tom and the Webster family during Tom's transition into death. So, Amma, please come up.
Well, like everybody who has spoken so far, I feel very touched and very honored to be here, as well as sad. And having been more recently part of the Webster We Hunt family, I'm only just knowing this family for a few years. And yet, having lived in the studio, when you're actually living in a building that somebody has built and designed, you get a sense of the inner workings of their mind in a different way, you know, because I'm living in an environment that they created. But as you can imagine, you know, I came there because I was a meditator. That's how they found me. And Tom was delighted. And so he made it really clear he'd be happy to talk about spiritual stuff at any possible point. And as a meditation teacher, I had some retreats or intensive courses, and he was excited to come on them. So what we have been hearing in the theme as an engineer of somebody who wants to dive into something was something that translated immediately into his spiritual practice. So the retreat that I led was a retreat on dependent co-arising, which was a particular philosophical doctrine in the Buddhist teachings, which is the most complex and deep philosophical doctrine that exists. And I can't remember how long after the retreat, but maybe a month, he came to me and he asked me if I'd be willing to read his paper that he had written on it, that was like 30 pages long, that had sub-commentarial discussions about all of the links and how they were related to the different mindsets, and wanted to know if he should share this out with everybody on his e-list.
I received this.
And I was actually blown away because, you know, certainly I had seen him in operation, but I didn't actually dial in to the level to which he was able to take something, internalize it, and then express it in a way that was clear and coherent and effective. Awesome. So I was living there and part of the family, and extended part of the family, and then I moved to Maui. And so we had some Zoom calls and all the rest of that, and I wanted the whole family to come. And, you know, and then I heard he got sick. So for me, there was an interest of what can I do to help? Like with all of us, what can I do to help? So I'm in Maui, and I'm not in regular conversation with the family, but I just would come up in the morning, I'd meditate, and I'd have this sense, oh, I have this feeling of what's needed. So I'd make these voice recordings and I'd send them. without having a clue whether this was actually helpful or not helpful or how it was landing. So I wasn't in the field to know. But the thing about meditation is that when we quiet our minds and we relax our attention and we allow ourselves to stop focusing on the things that are moving through our awareness and relax into the nature of awareness itself, there is no sense of time and space and distance. There is no sense of me being here and you being there. There's a field of awareness that we relax into. And in that field of awareness, things can arise and be known and be shared. And that's what was happening. And for me, it was mind-blowing because I'd never had that experience before where in 2,000 miles away, I would wake up in meditation and have clarity about what it was that I needed to talk about and share it and then get feedback after the fact that it was on point. So just to summarize some of the things that I was sharing in the meditation, one of the things that I was acutely aware of was both how brilliant Tom was, as well as how hardworking he was, and that I was sensing that this transition, having had this stroke, was putting a little bit of tension in his system because his way of being with others was to drop everything and do things for them. And all of a sudden, he's in a situation where everybody's having to do things for him. And that's a big shift for most people. So I was inviting him to remember that the purpose of meditation is not to focus on the identity that we have, that we form based on certain characteristics, but to relax into that awareness which is embracing and able to be present independent of circumstances. And so I would send it off, and then I would, go into my garden, and I'd go into the ocean, and all this while I'm having conversations with him and finding stones and all kinds of things like this. And, it was my birthday, and I was looking down at the sand, and I picked up stones for the family, and I have found this perfect heart stone just as I was having this long conversation with Tom on the beach about what letting go meant like from the perspective of where he was then. And so part of what I was sensing is that in addition to the depth of his practice and his commitment to spirituality, there was an inevitable kind of transition to move from being so capable to having to understand that who one essentially is not based on all of one's attributes. And in talking to him and in offering guided meditations and in supporting him to relax into the love of who he is, rather than the love of who he can be because of everything that he can do for everybody else. And one of the things that I felt really delighted with was the family's ongoing reporting of how peaceful he was. So to have somebody who is as brilliant, as capable, and as self-sacrificing as Tom lived his entire life, and then in an instant have that shift. For him to transition through what he did, and to do that with the level of ease that he did, for me is a testimony to the commitment as well as the depth of his spiritual practice. And so I continued to send meditations throughout this time. And when I was hearing, after he had the second stroke, that he hadn't had any food and he hadn't had any water, and that his vitals were stable, I sent him another recording. And I told him about Father Bede Griffith, who is a spiritual meditation teacher and a philosopher, who had had a stroke. And Father B. Griffith said that he highly recommended having a stroke to anyone. And the reason why he said that is because when certain cognitive functions are diminished, which is one of the things that can happen with a stroke, then it accentuates the ability to relax into the field of awareness and to realize what the spiritual teachings and meditation practice is designed to show you. So I said in the recording to Tom, I said, Tom, you've been hanging out, for 10 days without drinking, without eating anything. And what I imagine is happening is that you understand emptiness now in a way that was never available to you before. And if this is what your experience is, I'm happy for you. And so a few days later, he did pass. And I don't remember if I was in my garden or I walked down to the ocean. And this huge holographic image of Tom showed up. And he was 20 years younger, and he didn't say anything, but his face was radiating a sense of ease and contentment and gratitude and joy and love. And it wasn't only the love of all of the people that he loved, but it was the love of relaxing into his own skin and feeling confident that he had done a good job.
Thank you, Mama. And thanks to all who have spoken so far today. I have to just say, after hearing all the wonderful eulogies, stories, and thoughts about Tom, just want to pause for a brief moment here to feel the presence of Tom. I mean, can there be any doubt that he is here with us, inside of us, smiling down on us, as we celebrate a rich and meaningful life well lived? All right, we're gonna take a short break now, I think about 10 minutes or so, and just so people can stretch their legs. If you haven't had water, get a drink of water, or use the restroom or something, and then we'll come back and have our open mic session. So I think a few folks have signed up to talk, so we'll come back and make an announcement to start that. So just take a short break right now, and then we'll be back. I do want to mention we've got a guest book up here that at some point now or during the reception, please feel free to come up and sign that. And there's obviously some photos here to take a look at as well. So let's just take a short break right now and we'll be back.
Everything's impermanent, all that arises must surely pass away. It must surely pass away. And in the passing there is peace. 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 And in the passing there is peace.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mama. I think Nate would like to come up and say a couple of words here. This is Kelsey's husband.
Hi. I'm Nate. I'm Kelsey's husband. Tom is my father-in-law. I spent a lot of time with him. We're really close. I'm also just going to read this. Hope that's okay. When I first met Tom, I was nervous. You never know what it's going to be like meeting the father of the woman you're sleeping with for the first time. But Tom showed me genuine interest and curiosity and goodwill from the very beginning. And now that I'm a father of a daughter, I recognize that this could be a hard thing to do, a hard thing for a dad to do. But I grew to realize that Tom's goodwill and curiosity for who people really are wasn't just for me, it was for everyone and everything. He was a learner in every sense of the word. He wanted to understand things, and his sense of curiosity was genuine through and through. This applied to nearly everything from the pipes under our kitchen sink to Sam Harris and his theories on free will versus determinism to religion, specifically Buddhism, as we talked about, and what I sometimes think of as the space between life and death. Tom so wanted to understand that space and to experience it when the time came. I hope he did. It's been said already, but Tom's laugh will stick with me more than anything else, perhaps. It was sudden and thunderous and would often take people by surprise who hadn't heard it before. I remember the first time I heard it feeling surprised and then immediately inspired to laugh myself. It was nearly impossible not to join in laughter with Tom. It was truly contagious and affected everyone around him. Tom had that way of filling the room with his laughter and his presence. Tom was truly a social butterfly and would go from person to person, striking up conversation with everyone individually at a dinner party. By the end of the night, Tom would have spoken to everyone from the babies in the room to the elderly, meeting prospective energy levels in stride, either with the silliness with our 4-year-old daughter, Skylar, or patience and thoughtfulness with my dad, Charles, who happens to be the exact same age as Tom and who's sitting out there. My dad and Tom were kindred spirits from the start. It was almost odd how much they had in common. And it was easy for me to think of Tom instantly as a second father because he was just like my own in so many ways. Helpful, supportive, inquisitive, full of guidance and stability, a rock and a resource, a pillar, a backbone, a star in the sky that may not always be looked at, but is always there for navigation and direction when needed. I miss Tom immensely. And he was taken too early from this world. As I've gotten older, I've found it difficult to transition from being taken care of to taking care of my parents in certain ways. Life goes on until it doesn't. I never thought about who would die first amongst Kelsey's and my parents. That wasn't a ranking or a race I'd ever cared to entertain. But if I ever had, I certainly wouldn't put Tom at the top. I think somehow I thought he'd outlive us all. What I can say is that I've learned a lot from Tom, and I wish I could tell him this directly now. He taught me how to use tools I'd never heard of before, how to think through Buddhist philosophies through a lens and perspective that was relevant for me in my life, and perhaps most importantly, how to be open to anything, and not to think of myself or my role in the world strictly defined, but as fluid and transient, and one that can be multifaceted and knowledgeable about a wide range of subjects, areas of interest, and areas of expertise. I'll take those gifts from Tom with me until I leave this world as well. Perhaps I'll pass them on to my kids. And lastly, the heart of recognition that I want to share today is that Tom gave me his daughter. Emotionally, spiritually, and physically handed her to me on our wedding night. placing her hand in mine, and then married us together. Got like 2 more sentences, sorry. Once again, now being the father of a daughter, I can't think of a bigger gift in the world. I will be forever grateful for that, and I'll do my best to cherish that gift and to love Tom's daughter, my wife, Kelsey, with my full heart. And nothing less as long as I live. Thanks.
Thanks, Nate. Beautiful. I'd like to ask David here, who'd like to say a few words there. Thank you.
Hi, David Max. I was with Tom while he had his first stroke, and was following the posts that Kelsey mostly wrote on the website, and was just so deeply touched by the sense of the love and the care that was surrounding Tom as he was transitioning. I came across a writing piece by this Zen Buddhist monk, Thich Nhat Hanh, who wrote this shortly before his death, and I just thought it would be nice to share it today. He wrote, "I asked the leaf whether it was frightened because it was autumn and the other leaves were falling. Sorry. The leaf told me, no, during the whole spring and summer, I was completely alive. I worked hard to help nourish the tree, and now much of me is in the tree. I am not limited by this form. I am also the whole tree. And when I go back to the soil, I will continue to nourish the tree. So I don't worry at all. As I leave this branch and float to the ground, I will wave to the tree and tell her, I will see you again very soon." That day, there was a wind blowing, and after a while, I saw the leaf leave the branch and float down to the soil, dancing joyfully, because as it floated, it saw itself already there in the tree. It was so happy. I bowed my head, knowing that I have a lot to learn from the leaf. So please continue to look back, and you will see that you have always been here. Let us look together and penetrate into the life of a leaf so that we may be one with the leaf. Let us penetrate and be one with the cloud or with the wave to realize our own nature as water and be free from our fear. If we look very deeply, we will transcend birth and death. Tomorrow, I will continue to be, but you will have to be very attentive to see me. I will be a flower or a leaf. I will be in these forms and I will say hello to you. If you are attentive enough, you will recognize me and you may greet me. I will be very happy.
Thanks, David. Steve Schiller, I think, would like to join us. Steve is one of our LBL founding members here.
Thank you, Fred. Okay, so I want to actually thank Fred and thank all of you. The stories I heard today is really reinforced the notes I put together this morning. Been thinking about this for a while, and I really wish I'd known about that Velveeta cheese and the white bread, though. I just, that would to have him come by one time and offer him a Velveeta. I just because that would have gotten a Tom laugh, wouldn't it? Yeah, that would have gotten a Tom laugh. So, so I miss Tom too. Tom to me is still a mentor, a neighbor, unindicted co-conspirator, and a friend. As Fred mentioned, I met Tom at LBL when we were in that solar group. We got our picture up here. And there weren't too many engineers, a lot of physicists, a few architects. And no offense to my physicist and architect friends, but I was a brand new engineer, and if you need to know how to actually get something done, it's probably better to actually go talk to an engineer than a physicist or an architect. No offense, some of my best friends. And Tom was a hell of an engineer. And, you know, a lot of what people have been talking about today just really reinforced to me why that was. It was that curiosity, right? It was that innate, amazing curiosity. And if you read and learn about other engineers, people who created things, you know, Leonardo da Vinci, and Edison, although Edison was a jerk. But it was that curiosity just really drove him. And what Tom had that and the sharing and the giving. It was such a great resource. And Tom even signed my professional engineering application 40 years ago. Perhaps his only serious lapse in judgment that I can think of. Well, kind of keeping in touch, but not too much. But when we moved to our current home in Piedmont about 20 years ago, Tom and I reestablished our friendship, especially since it turned out that Tom and Chris and Kelsey and Brent were just around the corner. And so Tom and I got to share cat and dog watching, discussing how to solve the world's problems, about the same level of importance. Some projects we get to work together on with rebuilding together Oakland and around our own homes, and reconfirming that steady engineering approach of things like, you know, measure twice, cut once, which too often resulted in then figuring out how to redesign our project because we cut the piece of wood too short. So I miss Tom. I miss that inquisitive mind, you know, always asking why. He's always asking why. Asking because he wanted to learn. And because he wanted to make things better for all of us. And I miss Tom and that compassion. Feel a little nervous quoting the Dalai Lama here with a Buddhist priest here, but there was an expression that I thought of from the Dalai Lama that I think just described Tom to me, and that's if you want to help others, show compassion, and if you want to help yourself, show compassion. And that's what Tom was about. He was a mentor to me. I'll forever think, you know, what would Tom do? And you know, I think someone mentioned it's a life well lived because I'm a better person for Tom, and I think we all are, and our world's a better place. So I miss Tom. I'm gonna see him coming around the corner with that laugh. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, I know we have one more request to speak, but are there any others that I haven't spoken to? Lainey. All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Okay, hi everyone. It's so lovely to be here with all of you today. I want to share with you all an important, if short, chapter in Tom's life, which was the summer of the tiny house construction at Berkeley's Richmond Field Station, the summer and fall of 2016. Tom was a transformative figure in my life, and I met him at one of the major milestones and turning points of my 32 years. At Brett's invitation, he started coming out to the tiny house meetings in the spring and really jumped into helping out at the build site of the tiny house in late summer to set up the electrical and plumbing systems, and bringing his friends, Fred, Peter, others who are here, to help out. Soon it felt like he was at the build site every single day and for more hours than any of the rest of us on the team. It was such a privilege to be able to learn from him and work with him on that project, and it was through working with him that I really came to know his son Brett on a deeper level. I loved working with both of them. my favorite people to be at the build site with, because they empowered me to take on seemingly impossible tasks, like designing and building a gray water recycling system that turned used sink and shower water back into reused sink and shower water. Tom believed in me, which is really a crazy and amazing thing, because I had no experience doing anything remotely related to setting up gray water plumbing systems or generally being handy. I was just motivated to create something water recycling at the pinnacle of possibility for sustainable homes. And that orientation towards sustainability and climate resilience really spoke to Tom and brought him on board to help out the only way he knows how, with his full self. He helped me pick out plumbing parts, draw plumbing diagrams, and even get under the trailer on our backs to work upside down on installing this crazy system when I was about 26 and he was 75. I'm so grateful Tom was kind and generous enough to donate so much of his time to the project that summer and fall, all because he loved his son Brett and wanted to see and help him succeed in everything he takes on. I was lucky enough to witness the day he convinced another crucial team member, Gawain, to stick with the project because he had such unwavering faith in his son to accomplish what he takes on, and that faith was why he was there. He used it to spread confidence among everyone else that we would, in fact, complete this project to a very high degree of quality and success without cutting corners or compromising on the integrity of the pursuit. Tom helped show me what an amazing person his son Brett is, and was immediately a warm and receptive family figure as Brett and I came together. He married us last May at Green Valley and helped launch us off with the best possible preparation into marriage and parenthood. He's a shining example of who I hope to be as a parent and a person. Thanks.
Thank you, Laney. Beautiful. All right. Great moments here. I know we've got any others that would like to say a word at this point. Okay, come on up.
Hi there, I'm Brian. Well, first of all, I wanted to thank Chris and Brett and Kelsey for enabling us to share this celebration. It's been wonderful, and we've all learned something about Tom. And I've known Tom, first met him in actually I know the date, Halloween, October 31st of 1975, and you'll take a lot of drinks to get any more out of me on that one. First, Tom, I know you're here watching us because you never could miss a good party. So, welcome wherever you are. You'll be missed. You're part of the fabric of so many of our lives. It'll be hard not to notice you're not here. But on the other hand, it'll be easy to keep you in our thoughts as our memories of our interactions with you remain embedded in our spiritual fabric, which for me is comforting and provides some peace. I particularly enjoyed my time with Tom discussing anything and everything, as you've all already talked about, from politics to hot water heaters to wine and so on. There wasn't anything he wasn't interested in. Just this morning, I was reading an article in the New York Times about recycling and had to stop myself from hitting the forward button to share it with Tom. So instead, I had to settle for sending it to my daughter. Tom, all the best in the next life, and hope to meet up with you again soon. Thanks.
Thank you. Oh, okay. We've got something from Nate's dad here. Go ahead.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, this is from my dad. He wrote this and asked me to read it. My dad, if you haven't met him yet, he has Parkinson's and he has just a little bit of trouble with public speaking. So this is from my dad, who I mentioned met with Tom on a regular basis, same age. They were really good friends. Dear Tom, we've talked many times about Buddhist ideas, about how the stories we tell about who we are just stories. There is no self. You maintained mindfulness is a secular form of Buddhism, and how one needs to let go of one's obsessions, fixations, attachments. More than that, you proposed this goalless goal is a form of awakening that yields living in the world but not entangling with it. Tom, I have addressed this letter to you starting before you passed on, but now that you have passed, I think, who should I address it to now? You are not in this world. You are not anywhere. So now I think about what it means to be dead. Maybe we return to the beginning of all life. Most of us take all of this for granted, how all life participates becoming our world, this amazing planet we live on, how it can be lost. It's starting to think you are not here on this planet, that your loud bellowing laughter won't be ringing through the hallway, that your generosity and kindness towards everyone are now memories. When blindness progressed and I couldn't drive to meet you for lunch, you volunteered to drive me, and you volunteered to drive me and you to the restaurant. Because I am immunosuppressed, when COVID struck, you volunteered to pick up sandwiches and come to my house. You never failed to be at my side, bringing me a plate of food, letting me take your arm to walk to one place or to another, talking with me when I felt washed ashore and isolated. You lent your tools to our son-in-law and crawled under the house with him to investigate plumbing problems. That's true, he did. You, at 80 years old, helped him figure out how to electrify works in an induction stove. Oh, excuse me, how the electricity works in an induction stove. That's true, he did that as well. I think about how you said you got up every morning and meditated an hour before breakfast. It reminds me how much your practice influenced your behavior and your relationship to me and our discussions. From Buddhist perspective, it is a matter of viewing the world through the lens of compassion, recognizing the interconnectedness of the world, you said. We are bereft of time affluence, you noticed. Economic growth is antithetical to environmental health. You and I used to get together to discuss these things and discuss this kind of Buddhism. I miss you, Tom. I miss your Buddhist training, which carried you and me into a place there was no self, only invented stories. Yours is perhaps one of the brightest. I believe these thoughts of yours will live on in the friendships you have established, in the sense of peace and goodwill that you spread before us like a prepared meal, concepts and understanding that will exemplify one of your favorite sayings: pain is unavoidable, but suffering is optional. Tom, you join with all of us together in our memories. Love, Charles.
Really nice, really nice. I know we've got one more. Did you want to come? Okay.
So I'm Margaret Ovenden, and this is Garrett Keating. And we knew Tom through the work of Piedmont Connect, which is a sustainability organization in Piedmont. And I know I first met Tom at the meetings of the Climate Action Plan Task Force that I was on. And he came to every meeting, and he always had really, spot-on comments. So I got a sense that he was really a committed person. So I told him about Connect, and I said, would you like to come to some of our meetings and check us out? And he did. And before long, he was serving on our board. Since we only knew him after his retirement, it's wonderful to hear about his life, because there's a clear pattern, and I really see him more fully now from this service. It's really wonderful. So I think we're just going to talk about one project. It's what he was working on, at the time of his stroke. Fortunately, we'd gotten to a place where we were able to carry on without him. We couldn't have early on. So basically a couple years ago, the city of Piedmont had a vote on issuing a bond to redo the community pool. It had reached the end of its lifetime. It needed to be redone. So as soon as the bond measure passed, Tom started saying, well, there's got to be another way to heat the water, which is a huge energy suck, with something other than natural gas. And so a bunch of us started to meet, and Tom was saying, well, I bet you if we took these electric heat pumps and we paired them with some, solar PVT and some thermal solar and, use some grid electricity. And he really started to dig in deep with the calculations. I mean, we could not have done that without him. And honestly, someone who is also a building, she's an architect, but she really knows stuff. She saw his calculations. She said they were brilliant. So anyway, I'll let Garrett take over a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. So, Tom and I and another scientist were on a subcommittee for Connect, and I'm a scientist as well. So I worked with Tom. I'm a biologist, not as quantitatively rigorous as the engineers and architects and physicists. So Tom would blow me away. I mean, we would. The other thing is I was a city council member, so I knew a little of the insides of City Hall and how these projects go, which are not always, scientifically based. but that would not bother Tom because he was about getting to the heart of the problem. And so we would meet. As Margaret said, he put together this, analysis of panels, heat pumps, water volumes. I mean, and he always wanted more, right? There's always more to the problem for an engineer. Anyway, we would meet, and which invariably meant him showing me his latest spreadsheet, and I would try to follow, but invariably, he would be way ahead of me, and then he would be figuring out things he wanted to tweak. And we would end the meeting, well, I'm going to go back and work on this. And when Fred and Kelsey and Brett were saying how just how rigorous Tom was in addressing problems, he really was. He would always say he was going to look into it, and he would. I mean, he really did his homework, and he would just come back with more and more information. And I picked up a phrase. He wore me out, honestly. I mean, he was just so good at this. But he left me with a phrase. Whenever we would end our meetings, Tom would say, well, I'm going to go suss it out some more. That word suss came into my vocabulary. And any time now I'm going to try to suss things out, I'm going to think of Tom. Thanks.
And just to kind of end the story, just like last month, or no, actually 2 weeks ago, the city council voted to go with an all-electric pool. So, yeah. And his calculations, the energy engineers who had the actual access to the real data, we had to kind of use the best we could come up with. Their calculations were, Tom's calculations and their calculations were pretty much the same.
Right,
yeah, it was, so even without all the information, he was able to figure it out. It was really impressive. So we miss him terribly. He's a wonderful person. I'm really glad we got to have part of his life with us. So thank you.
I know Tom would be proud to hear that news about that pool going forward. That's fantastic. That's really incredible. Let's see. I think we'll be about ready to invite the men's group up. I think we've got one last thing, and then I think we should probably break and get going on some of this food out here. So we've got Tom's men's group, and they will explain themselves accordingly.
Yay, we're all here. This is the five of us. So my name is Clive, and I'm the first to speak here. Oh, okay. Is that better? Hello?
There you go.
Okay. The men's group has been in existence for 30 years, actually. Tom and Steve Book, Maureen Book is here, were the founding members of the men's group. They formed it following the dramatic and huge Oakland Hills firestorm, which burned 3,000 homes, more than 3,000 homes, killed 25 people. And unfortunately, Tom lost his home along with Steve Book. So this was a very traumatic event, and Tom and Steve felt the need to discuss the loss with other men. Tom then asked me if I wanted to join the group, and my house had survived, fortunately, due to the gallant effort of the firemen to stop the fire at Hillcrest School. I was downwind from Hillcrest School. But the fire issues were the main topic in the men's group in the early years. But as time heals all wounds, we got on to other topics. Tom could be very serious, and then all of a sudden he would laugh and even dance. So, but right up to the very end, he would be a person in our men's group who you could rely on to entertain us with his wit, his fun, and his jokes. So I'm going to let Jack be next with some of the details of Tom's personality.
I need something to hang on to here.
Yeah.
It wasn't easy to listen to everyone, and certainly isn't easy to stand here. Give me a second here. Thank you. I've known Tom for almost 30 years now. He was one of my oldest and wisest friends I had. I was invited to join the Fathers Group, as we called it back then. The common denominator was that the six of us were all fathers of sons and daughters of similar ages. We met once a month for 30 years now, and we added a yearly retreat up in the Sierras where margaritas overflowed and conversations were endless. As our kids grew up and moved out of our homes, we graduated to calling ourselves a men's group. Here are some of the things I've learned from Tom. How to be generous, both with his time and his money. How to be the supportive husband and father. How to have decades of engineering experience and still miscalculate how many solar panels is needed on his house to power his sub-zero freezer.
Is that true?
How to make a fantastic margarita with limes or pomegranate juice with the options of 3 different tequilas. How to forgive and apologize to a nasty neighbor after a loud shouting match. How to clean up the house after the house cleaner left, so his wife did not pick on the house cleaner for not doing a thorough job. How to laugh, how to cry, how to listen with no judgment, how to pick good chocolate. It had to be organic, fair trade, all natural, pasture raised, gluten-free, free range, BPA-free, non-GMO, of course, and how to pick the best ice cream. I also learned from Tom how to share and sip a delicious wine after we acknowledged each other with the clinking of the glasses. When Tom really got into Buddhism, like a true engineer, he wanted to dissect the human condition, the thought process itself. He wanted to take apart and understand every part of the brain, his brain. It was the equivalent to wanting to take apart a combustion engine while it was running. We often discussed in our men's group if our lives were being relevant, impactful in the world. Tom, your life was relevant, difference-making. You live on in your family, in your friends. You live on in me, everyone who ever knew you. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Jim Kelsey. I'm the most recent member to join the men's group. And I remember the first time that I met Tom face to face. I have to pick to see this instead of you. We were boarding a Southwest flight on our way home from countless ASHRAE conferences. This is another community that I know many of you shared with Tom. And before I knew the men's group even existed or was started by Tom, I knew him through that community. But actually, before then, I knew Tom first by reputation because his name was well respected. And I hope that those of you in Tom's family and friends really understand the depth of this. Tom's research was widely respected and his contributions to his field were many. So when I met him in person for the first time, I was a little starstruck, frankly. But what I remember was that he and I struck up such an easy conversation, and I was left reeling a bit that Tom and I not only shared a passion for the science of buildings, but he was present in a way that immediately relaxed me and provided a warm environment for a healthy and vibrant conversation. He embodied what I only found out later was his own description of his work to, quote, study the potential of Buddhist practice to help with global warming mitigation and adaptation. Each word chosen carefully by Tom. I'll pass it on.
I'm Peter, and I play bass in the group. I didn't realize, having known Tom only 23 or 24 years, that it really makes me feel like I'm a teenager compared to some of the stories and experiences that we've heard tonight. I also didn't realize how NIMBY was a incredible pivot experience for a lot of people. That's where I met Lainey, crawling around under the plumbing there. And it was a miraculous experience. And then I went to the Sacramento contest where they had 11 of these trailerable tiny houses. And I think you guys came in second because the refrigerator was not as energy efficient as it was supposed to be, right? Is that about it? But then you guys have been living in it for what, 5 years? For free? Okay, good. It belongs to, I think, this university, but okay. Well, the 5 blokes you see here today are the remaining members, the current members of the men's group that Tom co-founded 25 years ago with Steve Book, as you heard, as a desire for community as well as a secret society for the sharing of an occasional secret. We have been through births and deaths, marriages and divorces, politics and refinancings, and the vain attempts of some of our sons to become juvenile delinquents. But they survived. During these years, our families have been our anchors and continue to be so today. Tom, it's not easy doing public speaking. Tom was in love with all the people in his universe. From his wonderful wife, Chris, to Brett, Kelsey, Nate, Lainey, and the expanding universe of newly arriving grandkids. At our monthly meetings, Tom
set most of the agendas for the group and always had 12 topics to my 2. We usually had to tie him down lest his giant balloon of interests take us all up into the stratosphere. I found 2 more studies on that topic, Tom would say, and would forward them by email at the slightest flicker of interest. We imagined a day when he would have enough time to read all the articles he had bookmarked. That's probably what he's doing right now. As far as politics, Tom Webster summed up the present state of capitalism as plutocratic, oligarchic kleptocracy, which can be explicated as the wealthy class at the top stealing most of the money. This phrase, plutocratic, oligarchic kleptocracy, and this will be on the quiz later, he and I talked about making a vanity plate for his Prius. It would have taken the whole front bumper, but then we figured that the metal workers at San Quentin would get it misspelled, and anyway, that idea died. A couple of times over the years, Tom brought up the concept of imposter syndrome at our men's group, and it's resonated with a few of us in the group. The idea is that in our class-conscious work society, one advances on merit and or accomplishments and or credentials. In his work life, Tom was surrounded by PhDs and advanced degrees of all kinds. And occasionally he felt the lack of initials behind his name. Even though his decades of aerospace and building engineering experience had put him on the leading edge of research at this wonderful university, I always admired his honesty at being willing to discuss this echo of insecurity decades after it didn't matter. Tom was a very spiritual fellow and approached his practice of Buddhism with the zeal of an engineer. And it's funny how many engineers we have in this room, and how much Buddhism has played in the discussion today. He had this belief that consciousness and the celestial beauty of the mind could be explored, analyzed, and experienced, whether hiking in the canyons of his mind or on a far-reaching exploration of the cosmic gears of the universe. On our last retreat 3 years ago at Jack's house near Yosemite, Tom explained the idea of walking meditation. And we gave it some moving thought as we hiked to the top of Sentinel Dome above the valley. We will always honor his love of the great forests and outdoor spaces and the enormous granite boulders on whose tops we would sit in silence for a while. A firm believer in scientific progress and evolution, Tom went from a '55 Chevy to a Corvette to a Prius, and from the free speech movement to trying to help green the town of Piedmont. And after that lovely pool talk, I would like to nominate the new pool be named the Tom Webster Pool. So obvious. But in the DNA of those twinkly blue eyes was a guy who loved to dance to all kinds of rock and roll. And we can't think of a better way to celebrate Tom Webster than with some cosmic gyrations of our own.
Thank you.
All right, are we done for now? You guys?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Fantastic. Wow. It's just unbelievable. I think we need to take a break now, but thank you all for your contributions and thoughts, and we're still here, and we'll continue to enjoy each other's company with Tom immersed in all of this. And let's go get some food and drinks, and don't forget there's the guest book up here you can sign, and some pictures to look at.